The morning shift was always quiet at Millie's Diner, a corner restaurant that smelled like butter and coffee even before sunrise. The kind of place where regulars read newspapers and strangers became stories. Behind the counter, Danielle Harris, 27, worked in practiced rhythm, pouring refills, taking orders, smiling at people who rarely smiled back. Her uniform was simple: pale blue apron, name tag faded from too much scrubbing, curls pulled into a scarf that used to be bright red but had dulled from years of dish steam. Before you scroll, listen to this. A waitress spent months helping an old man no one cared about, until one day lawyers and 4 bodyguards walked into her diner with a letter that changed her whole life. What happened next will make you believe in quiet kindness again. Hit subscribe right now so you never miss stories where heart and humanity win over power and prejudice. Tap the bell to join a community that celebrates everyday heroes and second chances. And drop a comment telling us which country you're watching from, because compassion connects us all, no matter where we live. At 6:30 a.m., the doorbell jingled with its familiar charm. An elderly man stepped in carefully, shoulders bent forward as if years had grown heavy. Mr. Whitman, that was what his prescription bottles said the first morning he accidentally left them on the counter. Every day since, he'd come in just the same. Grey suit pressed, tie crooked, manners crisp. He spoke with the politeness of another era, one that expected service without conversation. Danielle greeted him the way she greeted everyone. "Morning, sweetheart." "Table by the window again?" He nodded. "Same as always." His voice had the gravel of old age mixed with something sharper, authority that hadn't yet retired. She brought him tea exactly how he liked it. 1 sugar, no lemon. He'd read quietly. Sometimes the paper, sometimes nothing at all. There was a loneliness about him no newspaper could distract from. It started small. The first act of kindness hardly counted as one. His hands trembled when he tried to cut his toast. She noticed, picked up his knife and sliced it without comment. The next day she threaded his reading glasses chain when the loop snapped. Soon she was walking him out each morning, arm under his as he tackled the uneven pavement. The routine became unspoken. The way the sun hit that corner booth. The rhythm of her pouring him more tea just as his cup cooled. The quiet gratitude in his faint smile that said more than thanks ever could. Other staff teased her. "You're wasting charm on a man who tips in nickels," the cook laughed. Danielle ignored him. She wasn't doing it for money. Something in the man's solitude spoke to her own. Her father had worked his life at the docks, died before retirement could save him. She knew what invisible pride looked like. One morning she noticed Mr. Whitman's shoes, expensive Italian leather stripped thin in the sole. "You need new ones before winter," she said gently. He had only nodded. A week later he appeared wearing the same shoes, polished to perfection but still patched. It made her heart twist. Pride again. Old men like him hated charity. On the 10th morning of their unbroken streak he didn't come. Danielle felt uneasy, checking the door every few minutes. Finally, around noon, a call came through the diner's landline. A calm voice asked, "Is this Danielle Harris? Mr. Whitman asked for you. Can you come by Riverside Hospital?" The cup in her hand slipped, scattering coffee across the counter. The hospital smelled like bleach and quiet fear. Danielle had never liked those sterile hallways. They reminded her too much of her mother's last winter. She hesitated at the reception desk, still wearing her diner apron under her coat. A nurse looked up. "You're Miss Harris? Mr. Whitman's expecting you." A few turns later she found him, half hidden under white sheets, window light etching lines even deeper into his face. The grey suit was gone, replaced by a gown that seemed too big for his thin frame. Yet when she stepped in, he gave that same small nod of recognition. "Miss Danielle," he murmured, voice softer but still clasping a trace of command. "You came." "Of course I came," she said, trying for lightness. "You missed breakfast. You've got a terrible attendance record." He managed a faint chuckle. "The diner will survive one morning without me." But as she pulled up a chair, she realized he wasn't joking. Machines murmured at his bedside. His wrists looked fragile against white fabric. "They said you wanted to see me," she said. "Yes?" He glanced toward the window. "Forgive the scenery." "Not quite the booth by the window, is it?" Her throat tightened. "You'll be back there soon enough." He smiled slightly, a patient expression that belonged to someone who had long since stopped believing in soon. "I've had better days, that's all." He closed his eyes for a moment. You've been kind to an old man. More kind than most. You make it sound like a confession, she said. Maybe it is. He turned toward her. I never told you what I used to do. I figured it wasn't my business. For half a century I ran Whitman Industries, he said. A shipping empire. Big offices, too many floors, not enough grace. I built wealth out of water and steel, but I couldn't buy real conversation anymore. Lost my wife 5 years ago? My son sold his ethics to investors. I suppose I came to your diner because it was the first place that didn't ask for anything I wasn't willing to give. Danielle stared. The man who ordered tea like clockwork had apparently owned half the cranes along the bay. Sir, I didn't know it. That's how I wanted it. He paused for breath. Do you know what it means to be cared for out of decency instead of debt? That's rare, Ms. Harris. You gave me that. Don't make this sound like goodbye, she said quickly, but the monitors answered for him, their steady rhythm thinning. He closed his eyes again. Promise me you'll keep showing up. Even when no one notices, she gripped his thin fingers. You don't need promises, Mr. Whitman. You need rest. He nodded faintly, smiling. Rest, yes. His hand slackened and an alarm triggered. Nurses rushed in. She stepped back as voices moved fast, practiced. Within minutes the room stilled again, but now the hum of machines was different, hollow. By the time a doctor touched her shoulder, she already knew. He's gone, the doctor said softly. Outside, the afternoon turned grey. She walked home without feeling her feet. At the diner the next morning, she placed his usual teacup at the window seat anyway, a silent ritual for someone who'd finally missed one too many mornings. 2 days later, everything changed again. At exactly 3 p.m., a black car the length of a small boat glided to a stop outside Millie's diner. 4 men in identical dark suits stepped out, followed by another carrying a briefcase. Heads turned inside the restaurant. The cook froze mid-flip of a pancake. The men entered as one. Miss Danielle Harris, the tallest asked. She blinked, rag in hand. Yes? He extended a business card embossed in gold letters. Whitman & Sons Legal. Her stomach twisted. Something wrong? No, ma'am. Mr. Whitman left specific instructions. The lawyer gestured toward the door where 2 more bodyguards now waited. You'll need to come with us. Every customer pretended not to listen but didn't move an inch. Danielle wiped her hands on her apron, trying to hide the shake. Is this about the funeral? Something larger, he said simply, and without another word they escorted her to the waiting car. The car's interior smelled faintly of leather and wealth, the kind of scent that tried to convince you everything outside was smaller. Danielle sat nervously between 2 silent bodyguards, whose wrists looked thicker than her ankles. The skyline blurred past the tinted window, her reflection wobbly against tall glass towers. Finally, they stopped before a building she recognized from news stories rather than experience. Whitman Tower. The centerpiece of the company he'd once ruled. A receptionist ushered her into a conference room bigger than her entire apartment. Polished marble tables gleamed under chandelier lights. The lawyer from the diner, gray-haired but precise, gestured for her to sit. Miss Harris, my name is Adrian Coleman, executor of Mr. Whitman's estate, he said smoothly. These men are here only for protocol. Please don't be alarmed. Too late, she muttered, pulling her coat tighter around her diner uniform. He smiled faintly. Understandable. But you're here because Mr. Whitman made very direct provisions before his passing. He opened the briefcase, drew out an envelope sealed in wax, and slid it across the table. Her name, Danielle Harris, looped neatly across the front in age-shaky ink. She touched the paper as if it might vanish. He wrote me a letter. He wrote you more than that, Coleman replied. Please read. Inside were 2 pages, lined and deliberate. The handwriting was careful, each word a piece of breath saved for purpose. Dear Miss Harris, if you are reading this, then my stubborn body finally conceded. Know first that your kindness did not go unnoticed. You treated an old man like a person when the world saw a relic. I built an empire only to realize too late that empires collapse without decency. You reminded me of it daily, cup by cup. You once said pride keeps people from accepting help. You were right. So I've chosen pride's opposite, gratitude. 10 Closed is a document transferring 25% of Whitman Industries' community shares to you. You are also appointed director of the Whitman Foundation, a new non-profit wing under the company's charter. Use it for whoever still gets overlooked. Don't hesitate because you think you're unqualified. You are qualified precisely because you cared when no one was watching. Show up, Danielle, always. She lowered the letter slowly, heart hammering. This can't be real, she whispered. Coleman slid another folder toward her. Official seals, signatures. It's as real as his last days allowed us to make it. Mr. Whitman was very specific. The words blurred. I bus tables. I scrape rent together. I don't know anything about running a company, let alone a foundation. Neither did he once, Coleman said gently. He learned. Now he's chosen you to continue learning in his place. The younger bodyguard, barely 30, black like her, gave a small, reassuring nod. For some reason, that steadied her more than the paperwork. Coleman continued, Mr. Whitman specified that 4 members of his security detail remain with you until the transition period ends. You'll be representing billions in shares, Miss Harris. Every syllable landed like weight she hadn't prepared to carry. What if the other stakeholders object? They can't, he replied simply. The shares were in his name alone. She pressed fingers against her temple. Why would he do this? Empathy impressed him more than ambition, Coleman said. And truth be told, he admired your refusal to take anything from him. Danielle exhaled shakily. This is insane. Great changes always sound insane, he said. There's a driver downstairs ready to take you home, or to pick you up tomorrow morning for your first briefing. Wherever you decide to stand, we'll meet you there. She didn't remember half of the elevator ride down, just the mirrored walls showing her confused reflection. Outside, flashes from paparazzi cameras greeted her before her new security blocked them off. Questions soared. Who is she? Why her? But all Danielle heard was the echo of Mr. Whitman's voice calling her Miss Danielle, like she mattered more than a title. That night, she sat in her small apartment, window open to city hum. On the table lay the stack of documents beside a cooling cup of tea. Across from her, her best friend Tasha stiffened. Girl, you're joking. $250 million company? Bodyguards? You? I don't even own a car, Danielle muttered. They left me something I don't know how to touch. Tasha leaned forward. You touch it by doing what you've always done. Show up. Same way you showed up for him. Danielle looked at the letter again. In it, she heard the quiet between orders, the moments he'd smiled when she said good morning without expecting one back. For the first time in her life, she realized her small acts hadn't just disappeared into routine. They had changed the ending of someone else's story. She closed her eyes. Tomorrow, she said, I'll learn what he built. The next morning, the street outside her apartment shimmered with new unreality. Black SUVs lined in a row, windows tinted, drivers waiting. Danielle half expected to wake up still wearing her diner apron, but the suits and the silence convinced her this day was real. A tall guard opened the rear door. Good morning, Ms. Harris, he said, and she noticed he said it sincerely, not like someone rehearsing politeness. Downtown looked different from inside a motorcade. The metal towers she used to see from bus stops now rose close enough to show their mirrored imperfections. When the convoy pulled into Whitman Tower again, reporters swarmed the sidewalk. Microphones flashed out like microphones at a movie premiere. She ducked reflexively, cheeks burning. Inside the executive wing, Adrian Coleman guided her to an office with sweeping floor-to-ceiling windows. On one wall hung a portrait of Mr. Whitman in his prime, painted decades earlier, gaze stern, background full of cranes and cargo ships. Beside it was a gleaming plaque already etched with a new inscription, The Whitman Foundation, Director Danielle Harris. She stared wordlessly. You did that overnight? She asked. Coleman smiled. He made us prepare the engraving months before his decline. He had faith you'd accept. For the next hours, they walked her through budgets, charitable programs, lists of existing projects. It was foreign territory, the language of millions and philanthropy, but some instincts transferred easier than she'd imagined. She knew what hunger looked like. She'd seen loneliness poured over cups of black coffee. She understood with sudden clarity what a foundation could reach that a diner couldn't. At one point, she stopped mid-page. These homes, she said, pointing to a folder labeled Community Outreach. They're closing because the bank wants land development. Do we own leverage there? Coleman blinked, impressed. Technically, yes. The trust controls their mortgage line. Then freeze the sale, she said. We'll restructure. They get 6 months rent-free. They need breathing room. He hesitated, scribbled the note. Consider it done, Ms. Harris. For the first time he sounded not like counsel, but admiration wrapped in surprise. When the meeting ended, she returned to the diner. It was off the clock now, lights half-dimmed, floor smelling faintly of bleach. Millie, the owner, wiped her hands when she saw her. You made the news, sweetheart. Could have told me I was feeding the city's next magnate. Danielle laughed nervously. Guess word travels faster than tea. You still have your job if you ever want it, Millie said. Money might buy miles, but people still need places like this to land. Something about that grounded her more than the marble office ever could. The days that followed carried rhythm again, just louder scale. The Whitman Foundation began rolling out grants to underfunded hospitals, creating apprenticeships for workers who'd aged out of their industries. Danielle insisted on visiting every project site. Her bodyguards learned she hated special treatment. She carried her own clipboard, shook every hand, listened more than she talked. In every meeting, new executives searched for the pedigree they couldn't find. She didn't speak like finance. She spoke like empathy given authority. When an intern once asked, "How'd you get here?" she smiled. By showing up for someone who needed me and finding out he saw more in me than I did. But success invited scrutiny too. One afternoon, a reporter cornered her outside the tower. Ms. Harris, people are calling you a Cinderella of capitalism. How does it feel to inherit from a man accused years ago of discriminating in his company's early days? She paused before answering, aware that cameras captured every expression. He spent his last years unlearning that, she said evenly. He built walls out of habit and then spent his final breaths tearing them down. The way forward is to keep them from being built again. The clip aired that night and went viral, not for scandal but sincerity. Messages flooded the foundation from across the country. Workers, students, strangers thanking her for answering venom with calm. One evening, exhausted, she walked to the riverfront where cargo ships prowled the water like slow beasts. Lights scattered across waves like stories half remembered. She folded her arms, breathing in salt and diesel. A familiar voice spoke behind her. Thought I'd find you standing on steel instead of marble. Coleman approached, coat collar turned up. We're moving forward exactly as he hoped, he said quietly. You would have made him proud. She looked out over the docks. He already made himself proud the day he stopped pretending worth only lives in titles. Coleman studied her a moment. Do you know he could have left his fortune to charities with famous names? But he said the world didn't need more names. It needed reminders. Danielle smiled faintly, eyes glinting with evening reflections. Then that's the job. Keep reminding. Winter crept in quietly, the kind that painted frost along window edges and made luxury cars move slower through slush. 6 months into her new role, Danielle finally felt she could breathe inside those marble hallways. The press called her the waitress who turned inheritance into purpose. She hated the word inheritance. It sounded accidental. When every morning she still earned her presence by learning one new thing Whitman Industries could do for the people living beyond boardrooms. One frigid afternoon, she returned to the foundation early from a site visit. The lobby smelled of pine. A massive charity gala for the foundation's new hospital wing was under construction. Reporters waited behind velvet ropes, camera lights blinking like restless stars. Her security team parted the crowd as she stepped up to the speaker's podium. But before she could greet anyone, she caught a glimpse of a familiar silhouette near the back of the hall. Grey coat, tilted hat, a poise she'd memorized from hundreds of mornings at the diner. For a dizzy heartbeat, she thought she was hallucinating. He couldn't be standing there. Danielle blinked. The figure lowered the hat and her chest seized. The resemblance to Mr. Whitman was startling. He smiled slightly and stepped forward with a calm surety. Coleman brushed past her, whispering quickly, "That's his son, Richard Whitman, Jr. He requested to meet you." Richard stopped at the edge of the stage, extending his hand. He was in his late 50s, sharp-jawed, expensive coat buttoned high. "Miss Harris," he said warmly, but his eyes measured. "I owe you both congratulations and perhaps an apology. My father and I didn't see the world the same way." She shook his hand, pulse skipping. He spoke fondly of you. Then he was kinder than our history deserved, Richard murmured. When the lawyers told me what he did, this transfer, the foundation, I was furious. I built Whitman Industries beside him for 20 years. Then he handed its legacy to a woman I'd never heard of. The crowd hushed at his honesty. Cameras whirred. But Richard's tone softened. Then I read his journals. Every entry in his last months mentioned a name. Danielle Harris, the girl who shows up. I realized he'd found what the company forgot, heart. And I came today not to contest, but to shake the hand that gave meaning back to his name. Applause swelled, spontaneous, startling. Danielle could only nod, the sound of clapping washing over her like gratitude finding echo. After the event, they talked privately in her office. He taught me empire, Richard said, staring at his father's portrait on the wall. You taught him empathy. Maybe between the two of us, the next generation will finally balance the equation. Together, they signed the papers establishing the Whitman Scholarship Fund, doubling the foundation's outreach. When the ink dried, Richard raised his glass. To unlikely teachers in unlikely places, he said. Weeks later, Millie invited her back to the diner for lunch. The same cracked vinyl booths, the same hum of conversation. She sat by the window, his seat, watching sunlight spill across the cup of tea waiting there. She whispered quietly, I showed up, Mr. Whitman, and for once tears came easy. That evening, walking home beneath streetlights dusted with snow, she found a stranger waiting by the stoop, one of the guards from those early days. He handed her a small package wrapped neatly in plain paper. Inside was a silver pocket watch engraved with words she instantly recognized, Keep showing up. It still ticked steady, right on time.